Our speaker today is Paul Burbage, who's one of our lead trainers and practitioners here at Studio 3. Paul's going to speak for about 45 to 50 minutes about Studio 3's unique approach to training and how we differ from other training organisations. So thank you for joining us today, Paul. I'll just hand over to you now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just turn my phone on. Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning for people that might be joining us from overseas and other countries as well too. Thank you as well too for joining, having a look at some of the names. I recognise a few names on the list as well too, so welcome back. It's good to have you back. So, pardon me. Today, as Rachel said, I'm going to be speaking for about 45, 50 minutes, and I look forward to taking some questions at the end as well there too. So just having a look at what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to share some slides and go through some of those things. Essentially today, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about who we are, what we do and how we do it, but importantly, probably more so about why we do the way that we do things, being a Studio 3 trainer and what that's like. Okay. So non-aversive approaches and beyond is sort of our subject matter for today. And with Studio 3, our mission is really to sort of be doing a very much a person-centered approach. And that person-centered approach is not focused on a person's behaviors or the changes that we feel that they might need to fix them, or to be looking at it from a deficit space. We're looking at the strength space. We're looking at essentially what it is that that person needs. And we're doing that by listening to them, getting an understanding of that person as well too, and really hearing what it is that they need and what they want. And the areas of life where maybe there's things missing and what we can do to sort of help bring that into focus a little bit. But also that's what we're going to be basing ourselves around when we're talking about using a person-centered approach, is actively listening to the voices of those individuals, particularly with lived experience. Okay. A key part of that is that we're trying to reduce restrictive practices, the use of restraint, the use of seclusion or non-inclusion as well too. And being able to sort of support that person to have the right sort of opportunities, to have their opportunities and support them to access a lot of those. And by doing so, we're going to be doing that through very much a focus of understanding, empathy, care, relationships is a key part of what we do and how we do it. Studio 3, we really promote those sorts of ideals and philosophies, particularly around the low arousal approaches, but use of positive psychology. So we're usually really coming from a humanist approach in how we support people. And as such, then, when we're supporting individuals, particularly individuals that have those complex levels of needs, of sort of support requirements as well, to make that care and that support very individualized for that person. So that means that we need to really craft a lot of unique solutions and approaches based around that person's needs. And that really takes away from that idea of a one-size-fits-all as well too. The way that we support, the way that we work, the way that we provide that input, the way that we provide our training, coaching and practitioner work really revolves around a comprehensive and a complete idea of the mental health, the well-being, the psychological support that person requires, but also their carers and the people that might be providing those support provisions as well too. So it's around the person, it's around families, it's around carers, it's around those organisations. And that means that quite a lot of that would be quite sort of intense, quite comprehensive and quite complex as well too, to meet the complex needs of the individuals that we support. Key part of that is the non-aversive approaches to managing the stress or stress for that person. And what we're talking about there very much is not just non-aversive physical or non-aversive environmental approaches, but also we're talking about non-aversive emotional and psychological approaches as well too, to managing stress and distress within an individual at those times of support. So we specialize in not just building that care and that support around the individual, but around the staff, the carers, the families, and the other professionals that are involved as well too. Okay. And that's no matter what that person's level of needs. So we work with a lot of people from different populations of different cohorts, intellectual disabilities, neurodevelopmental differences, older adults, mental health, children, children in care, children in schools, children with additional needs in schools, as well as mainstream schools as well too. And it's recognizing that as opposed to maybe a lot of other training programs or other sorts of models, that it might be very much a behaviorist approach, or just working out and focusing a lot around that person's behaviour. We recognise that there is no single approach, model or theory that's going to meet the needs of every individual. And as a result, there is no one size that fits all. There's not just a single manual that's going to help us around those support needs. Each individual is unique, and by recognising that as such, we know then that their needs, they should be able to expect and should have a bespoke level, bespoke support package around them to help them to meet those needs and to meet those unique requirements of that person as well too. And within our approach, everyone and everything matters. So it's the individual themselves who's front and center, who's in the middle and is at the center of everything that we're doing. But also we have to recognize the families and carers and supporters and the impact on them and how we can support them. The better we can support them, the better they're able to support the person that they're caring for. It's teachers, it's professionals. So it's also recognizing that, there'll be professionals in a team when you've got a multidisciplinary approach or multi-agency approach, that we need to, again, meet everybody's needs and everybody's involved and everybody's got equal input, but everybody's required to provide the best opportunities and the best support for the people they support as well too. Okay. And all of that is centered around supporting that individual who's in the middle of that. So by not focusing solely on behaviors, we haven't got a single focus. And also we're moving away from a holistic approach of taking things, different sort of sections, different areas of support, and doing them in a sort of holistic sort of side-by-side approach. We're trying to integrate them because we recognize as well too that a lot of the support that we do and the support that that person might need requires an integrated approach. And none of these approaches or models or theories work in themselves, isolated from each other. Everything's integrated. So we'll be talking about maybe developmental profiles of somebody, a developmental approach. What that means is that we're not just talking about emotional regulation, and we're not just talking about physical development or cognitive development or emotional development, social development, but a lot of those things are integrated and work from and are developed alongside and in conjunction with each other. And as a result, the support that we do needs to look at that bigger picture and have an integrated approach that goes with it. The approach itself that we do around supporting individuals, whether in services, in care and at home or in certain settings, we have that through the training courses that we do, and that's informed by a training needs analysis. So one of the big things that we've always done, but also it has been enhanced further with the Restraint Reduction Network's training standards, is that any training, any support that's given to staff has to be informed by what we call a training needs analysis. So it's not a one size fits all, it's not a generic package. Even if we're supporting a staff team around in a service where they're supporting more than one individual, even then that training needs analysis identifies the area of support of that individual or those individuals, the reports that they might have, the incident reviews and the reflective pieces around that as well too. And what we're looking at is looking at that to be able to develop and inform how we're going to put a training package together, how we're going to deliver that course curriculum as well too, to be able to support the staff with the right information and the right supports that are specific for that person at the centre of that care. The coaching and the practitioner work. So the coaching is actually being able to work alongside staff teams, to be able to work with them using observation and assessment, talking with staff, finding out where they find areas of difficulty, where they find maybe complexity, where maybe some of those areas that they themselves might be struggling, to be able to support that individual and also around the individuals themselves. And by observation and assessment, we can look at things from a different perspective in a bigger picture to be able to feed into and take from that staff team to be able to increase and improve the support for that individual. And by doing so, by having that sort of holistic or that sort of wraparound type approach with everybody involved, that means then that we've got a better support package, we've got better supports for that individual, and we find that they have a better quality of life. And then that will flow to staff teams and the people and the carers that they have got around them, which then flows back to that individual. So it's a dynamic that we're sort of working with there as well too. The coaching as well is along the side of supporting alongside staff teams and carers, and we can develop, we can implement, and we can embed low arousal approaches, those proactive and reactive management strategies. So one of the things that we don't do as a coaching team is we don't come in and tell you what you're doing wrong, what you should be doing. Here it is, here's your set of instructions, and then walking away. we're working alongside of you. We're alongside carers, we're alongside families, we're alongside parents as well too. Or if it's an individual we're supporting, we're working alongside in a collaborative way to really get a good idea about what it is that that person might need, where their supports and what they're looking for as well too from the people and the supporters around them. And then we get that practitioner work where maybe we might be doing a lot of the role modeling, we might be taking the lead, for example, in some of that, and we're directly working with that individual to enable staff teams to be able to see what we're doing and how we're doing it, and actually helping them to implement it by seeing it being implemented by ourselves as well too. As I said, the coaching and again the practitioner work, that's informed that training needs analysis, and that meets the needs of the team as well as the individual that's being supported. So when we look at the curriculum itself, a big part of that is the law, and the law is that legislation, and it's that piece of the legal work that tells us what we can and what we can't do, but also it's the ethical side of that law telling us how we can interpret that in the favour of the rights of that person. So there may be restrictive practices or restraints that a service can put into place that is not unlawful, but when we're looking at that, we might be pushing along and really emphasising the fact that we want to have a restrictive-free environment. We want to eliminate the restraints or restrictive practices that might be there, and how we can do that. So legally, there might be some things that can that might be okay to do as such, but at the same time, we're looking at saying, yeah, but ethically, should we be doing that? Ethically, if we're using a human rights approach, does that not say that we should be doing things in a different way? Should we be working from a human rights approach for that person rather than a legal one? And that sort of changes that emphasis away from a risk assessment or a risk averse type environment where there's restrictive practices, where there's maybe compliance or consequences and sanctions that might be a part of that base. And what we're thinking of is actually giving people more choices, more control in their lives, and working and supporting with them to be able to do that and to be able to use that choice and control as well. We're also looking at people's stress and how that can affect the behaviours, but also can affect areas of difficulty they might be experiencing, or areas where carers might need to support somebody. So stress and arousal is a big part of their work, and also looking at the stress response too. But recognising that with stress, in actual fact, if we can improve people's stress, if we can reduce people's overall stress burden, that will have a big impact on not just the stress that they might have, but how they experience stresses as well too. So we look at a person's well-being, and that's more than just feeling well physically, it's more than just mental well-being. We're talking about emotional, social, physical, and psychological well-being. And a big part of that is that we use the work of Martin Seligman and his PERMA model. So that's Martin Seligman from 2011, his book Flourish, again, positive psychology. PERMA being positive emotions, engagement, relationships, positive relationships, that is, meaning and achievements and accomplishments, to give people a good sense of well-being. And that increased sense of well-being, that better well-being, reduces stress levels, but it also increases people's supports, their resources, their abilities to cope. It helps with their relationships and being supported as well too, having that safety net around them. Good quality relationships where it's positive, and that unconditional positive relationships for a lot of the work that we do. And we recognize that relationships is one of the big things when it comes to supporting people. And in actual fact, anything that we do should be putting that as the highest value, and it shouldn't be doing anything that has an aversive or a negative impact on that relationship with the person we're supporting. And again, while we move away from restrictive practices, consequences, sanctions, or the use of restraints, knowing that that's going to have a big impact on those relationships. We're helping people have a better quality of life. And by doing that, we need to understand that person. So it's valuing that person. And by tailoring the support around that person is based on the fact that we should be able to value and understand who they are, what they need, what they like and what they don't like, what works for them, where they need the extra support, where things are missing maybe in their life to be able to be able to regulate their own stress, or being able to find ways to cope and use those coping skills and strategies. We look at stress and arousal. So that's the understanding of stress, how it impacts those people, how it impacts ourselves as carers, how it impacts everybody. Stress's role in people's behavioural responses to perceptions of stress or perceptions of threat or particular triggers as well too. And then that means we do need to have a look at and understand the impact of trauma and past trauma being aware of what trauma can do and how that impacts a person as well too, in the short and in the long term. It's from that is the low arousal approaches, and I'm really kind of assuming and hoping that a lot of people here are very much aware of the low arousal approaches. We have our low arousal Fridays where we have our foundation in our advanced course, and that understanding of low arousal approaches, how we can de-escalate people in crisis, how we can manage those crisis moments when people are feeling stressed and arousal levels are starting to increase or escalating. How can we regulate and how can we de-escalate somebody, or at the very least stop them from getting any further up into that crisis by using low arousal approaches that really understand the triggers for further escalation. We'll challenge consequences and sanctions approaches, and we also challenge anything that's behaviour focused as well too, because more often than not the behaviour is a communication of what that person might be missing or where they might be struggling. And by changing the behaviour, it's not doing anything to really consider why that person's behaving or presenting in that particular way. The idea is that if we have a better understanding of the person, we have a better understanding of their behaviour. And the better we understand that person and their behaviour, the better management strategies and approaches we can develop. And if we're better able to manage and support that person and help them to develop the skills and coping skills and coping strategies and the resources that they need, there'll be less need for physical skills, interventions, or risky restrictive practices. We also recognise, and that's through that proactive and sort of reactive approaches as well too, but we also recognise that, okay, there will be times when things get a little bit sticky, okay, and we will need some physical intervention skills. We'll need some mild ones of those, the least aversive types as well too. And for anyone that has done any of our training or experienced our training, has seen our training as well, you'll know that with the breakaways, it is the least aversive. It's getting yourself out of the sticky situation. It's about keeping people safe in that moment, but doing so when we need to, really looking at, do we really need to get out of some of those grabs and holds that we might be experiencing from people that we're supporting who are in that high state of arousal. So if I'm getting grabbed on the arm, if I'm being grabbed in my clothes, do I really need to get out of it? If not, then why am I trying to get out of it? Thinking of it as a communication, and then looking at other ways that I can maybe help that person to learn a different way, that instead of maybe grabbing me, that maybe it's just the high five or it's a handshake or it's that eye contact, it's that engagement gets that communication. And then also recognizing there will be times when we have those moments when there is an immediate and imminent risk of harm to that person or to others. And as a last resort, when everything else, the non-verbal, the non-aversive, the non-physical interventions have been tried and failed, that we do need to use some form of walk around, of some form of sort of hands-on approach. And again, the walk around is something that we've developed that we recognize as being the least aversive. It is something that is designed to be a very short period of time. It is recognizing that actually, if there isn't a situation where we do need to keep somebody safe and we make that physical contact, the focus on whatever it was, that risk of harm, that whatever it was that has caused us to go hands-on in the first place, is no longer there, because we recognize that actually making contact to someone that's in an already highly aroused state changes their focus to the person that's holding them. And if we can just redirect them away from that danger and then let go as soon as possible, then we've reduced that risk to ourselves and to that person of staying in that hold. We're giving them an option and an opportunity then to maybe do something different. And if that person backs away, that's all well and good. If they turn around and maybe start to damage the room or damage property or throw things around, that's all well and good, because they're not doing it to the staff member, to other people. And as long as they're not hurting themselves, the risk is diminished then of that immediate and imminent risk of harm. We've also given them that choice that if they do decide that they do still sort of in that heightened state and they need that physical intervention with somebody else, or that physical engagement with somebody else, whether that's me, my other staff member, or somebody else that might be near there, then, well, I've got the skills to go hands-on in the first place, so I'll do it again. And as soon as I make that physical contact, it's again recognizing that the harm or that risk of harm has actually dropped. It's now redirected to me and my colleague, in which case we want to let go as quickly as possible to reduce the risk of harm to myself or to that person of being in that hold. So that's a good way of sort of thinking about why we try to avoid going hands-on or using restraints. But when we have had to use those, when we've had to go hand-on, we're not escorting that person away. We're not holding on for a long period of time. We're not holding on until that person calms down, because we recognize that that is actually got a very high emotional, psychological, and a physical impact on that person. And if we're trying to use the least aversive way, then we're doing it for the least amount of time. So it's the least restrictive. Okay. So when we talk about physical safety, we're talking about keeping people safe. And what we have found, and over the years, it's been very much so that a lot of training programs will focus on keeping people safe, but often it's keeping staff safe. So there's quite a heavy sort of emphasis, and it has been in the past, on physical interventions, the use of restraints, being able to control people's movement, to be able to stop them from doing what they're doing, to be able to maintain them in some way, to get that sense of compliance. So as a result, then, being able to do those skills safely from that perspective has been very much about drilling those skills into staff. And staff have been very good about getting hands-on and getting into that sort of position to be able to initiate and maintain those sorts of physical skills without actually thinking about, well, do we need to in the first place? And if we're trying to use the least restrictive and remove restraints, then we shouldn't be going first in. We should be trying everything else that we can do first before we're using physical interventions. So as such, then, the restraints that we do use with the walk around, they're not maybe the most easiest to go hands-on with, but they're also very easy to let go. And it shouldn't be a case that staff are trained up that well, so they're very confident and find it very easy to go hands-on, but then actually find it very difficult to let go because they get that concern or that anxiety around, well, if I do let go, what could happen? What if that person comes back to me? Actually, I'll feel more confident and less anxious if I hold on to that person until they seem to calm down. And what happens then is that person, for two things, they don't calm down. What they do is they either exhausted or they give up and they stop struggling. And at that point, staff feel confident to let that person go. But it's not for the shortest time. It takes a long period of time. But the more that happens and the longer it lasts for each time, that person gets stronger and fitter with it, and those restraints will last longer until that person either gives in or they're exhausted from it. Okay. And what we end up finding is that people get used to having long periods of restraints, that they get used to being restrained, and they're relying on that as a way to regulate or to come back down for that incident to end. And what that means then is that people don't, that individuals who are supporting, they don't learn their own regulation strategies. They learn that they need someone else to regulate for them through those physical skills. And a lot of the work that we have done over the years is working with people that have been in those secure settings, who have got a history of a high level and long-term durations of restraint incidents. And what we found is that we have to go through a restraint decompression process. And that restraint decompression process is very much around taking away that risk of being restrained, taking away those physical interventions, and giving people that time and the space by withdrawing ourselves and from others and making sure the environment is safe enough that we can leave that person to find other ways to regulate. And it takes a period of time for them to develop skills because they're so used to other people doing it. And that's a restraint decompression. There was a young man that we worked with for a number of years, and he had gone into a secure sort of medical health sort of setting. It was a secure setting. He was very restricted in the amount of space. He was there from the age of 10. And over the next 5 years, his whole world was essentially one courtyard that he had limited access to, and to a big room, okay, and a corridor and a bathroom. And over that time, he'd gone from being 2-to-1 to 3-to-1 to 5-to-1 to 7-to-1. And when we started working with him, he was around the sort of the 8 to 10-to-1 mark. And that doesn't mean you've got 8 members of staff restraining this 15-year-old boy. What it was that staff over time, and this young boy had gotten so strong and so fit from these high levels of restraints, that staff couldn't maintain a restraint for 45, 25, 45, 50 minutes, even an hour or more, because it was too exhausting for them. He was a lot fitter because of that, but they weren't. And as a result, they were having to swap in and out. So that way, one member of staff would sort of move out and another member of staff would take their position and the restraint would carry on as well too. And having to wind that back took 12 months of being able to allow him to develop his own regulation strategies that didn't involve staff going hands-on, but being able to walk away. We talk also about psychological safety. So we've got to be careful about creating new traumas through restraints or restrictive practices, or triggering past traumas, or continuing the trauma that this person may have experienced as well too. And that's not just from experiencing those restraints or those interventions, but it's also witnessing it. And that's just as important for staff that may not be involved in an incident or a restraint or a physical intervention, but they may have witnessed it. In particular, may have witnessed it with that person being supported or the staff that are doing that support. And then we're talking about emotional safety. That's a physiological safety. We want to create supportive, positive, unconditional relationships. We want to co-regulate and help that person to develop co-regulation strategies with us, to be able to develop their own self-regulation strategies. We're working with them, supporting with them. So there's that collaboration and that co-production. But what we're trying to ensure we don't do is trigger a stress response or further escalation of their current arousal or stress states. And that's around that emotional safety. And that's recognizing that if we can really support an individual in times of crisis or pre-crisis, as someone's starting to get stressed or distressed and those arousal levels are escalating, it's just recognizing that we will support that person, understanding them, choices, controls as well too, working with what we know works, avoiding any aversive interventions, any physical interventions, or the use of restraints as well too. Get ourselves out to the other side, and we're maintaining those strong relationships where that individual is able to look at us as carers or as staff and say, when I was struggling, you seemed to get it. You didn't make things worse. You looked after me emotionally. You kept me physically safe, but also psychologically safe. I feel more confident with you in the future that if there is any other moments or other times when I am struggling, I know that you get me and you'll keep me not just physically safe, but psychologically and emotionally safe as well too. And I can rely on you. That gives me more confidence as that individual, but also for me as a staff member, I feel more confident supporting that person as well too. So we end up creating this sense of confidence between carers and the people that they're caring for and supporting. So some of the things we want to think about, least aversive. So in our physical skills, they are the physically least aversive. So we're not using pain or pain compliance. We're not holding on to people where they've been restricted, where they're not able to move away if they choose to move away as well. It's the least aversive psychologically. So we're not having that sort of trauma impact on people. And we're working with that person's trauma to actually avoid the use of physical skills or physical interventions. Least aversive emotionally because we're aware of the emotional impact of those moments and those incidents and those times of difficulty as well too, when someone becomes dysregulated. And that emotional safety should include feeling emotionally supported and cared for with a sense of empathy, understanding and compassion. It's least restrictive as well too, because even with the walk around, a person can still move and they can still move themselves away. With physical intervention skills, if somebody is sort of grabbing hold of you, whether it's a clothes grab, an arm grab, even with hair grab as well too, that person is still able to move. We're still not restricting them. We're not using strength, so it's not relying on making sure we've got really strong, big male staff, even sort of thing, or female staff that are physically capable, staff that aren't physically capable to work with and support somebody and have those physical skills, because not everybody's like that. Okay, we're looking at the fact that with carers and staff, we come in all different shapes and sizes and physical abilities and ages and abilities as well too. So what we're not using is not using strength, but we're using movement and keeping that person movement to redirect or refocus that person. And we're certainly not using pain. So there is no pain compliance. But even with our breakaway skills, we're still very conscious as well too, that even as we're still getting out of some of those grabs and those grab releases, those breakaways, even when we're getting out, we're still making sure that we do not cause any physical pain to that person. So we're very careful about joints and the joint positioning, but also we're thinking about emotional and psychological pain as well too of those. So we're not getting people off balance. We're not containing someone. We're not restricting them. We're not making them feel a sense of fear. And it should be for the least amount of time with any of our physical skills. So if we have gone hands-on with somebody, we're looking to release as soon as possible. And what that does is it allows that person to exercise some choice and control in how they might regulate themselves. And we're giving them that opportunity to be able to put those into action. And look, if there is some of those actions or regulation strategies that person might have that does involve a risk of harm to themselves or to others, then we might go back hands-on again. But the key bit is we're trying to manage this in the least aversive, least restrictive, for the least amount of time to get people through to the other side, physically, psychologically, and emotionally safe. And once we've done that, then we're looking at debriefing, and debriefing is a big part of that. So it's looking after ourselves, it's looking after staff, it's looking after carers, it's looking after the person we're supporting as well too. Debriefing the emotions from those incidents to be able to then sit back and to be able to objectively look about what happened, what maybe was the lead up to it, what did we do, what worked well, what didn't work well, what could we do next time that's going to be a lot better. Okay. And that gives us the opportunity then to develop better support strategies that is based around the needs and support needs of that person. So we've got some core areas that we talk about with our trainers and what we do as a training organisation. We have our low arousal approaches, which is about preventing further escalation and de-escalating in times of crisis, but also in times of high stress as well, towards distress. It's individual care, so it's ensuring that each person and their unique needs are being met, that we understand them as well too. We understand their unique situation, and we also looking at what their goals are to guide the interventions that we use. We're using person-centered well-being. So we talk about Martin Seligman and Perma. We talk about Dan Hughes and Pace. The idea that relationship is the key, and we're creating that safety, psychological, physical, and emotional safety through the relationship and through the interventions that we're using. Crisis management training, we are leading experts in that field. So what we're looking at is looking at the behaviours. We've moved away from managing behaviours of concern, or that terminology of behaviours of concern. We've moved away from that terminology of challenging behaviour to actually see these behaviours as behavioural signs of when someone is stressed or distressed, and what is causing that stress and distress, and how can we meet those needs and reduce the things that are causing the stress and distress, as well as reactively, how can we move and de-escalate and distract and divert someone away from the things that are causing that as well too. Crisis management training, we're looking at the insight and imaginative solutions to complex situations. So people that have got complex needs will need a complex approach as well too. And it's really making sure that we don't come up with simplistic, sort of easy to sort of implement strategies that on the surface, look easy to implement, but actually will cause further difficulties or cause further distress to that person. So it's really quite sort of a holistic and a wraparound approach in that manner, that we're looking at everything and then we're integrating that together rather than keeping it separate as well too. We're using confidence and compassion, so we're giving staff and carers the skills they need to be able to improve environments, to make them low arousal as well too, to reduce people's stress and their experiences, to be able to develop those positive relationships between supporters and individuals, because that's where that care comes from. That's the trauma repair work that comes from that. It's the trauma-informed care approach as well too. The low arousal approaches that we use is based on those relationships between supporters and individuals. But we have noticed and we have found and we have evidence as well too that staff feel more confident and less stressed themselves when they feel that they've got the skills to be able to manage those situations. They have a more positive relationship with the people they support, but also the person that is being supported also feels more confident, feels less stressed, and feels more positive. A young man that we worked with a number of years ago who has quite a complex level of needs and has experienced quite a lot of other different management or behaviour management training programs from the staff that have been trained that support him. And I think when he was in his late teens, pardon me, in one particular setting in a school, staff there used the low arousal approach, and that's the first time he'd ever had Studio 3's walk around and experience of it. And the feedback afterwards he was saying was that actually that is so much, it's not particularly the nicest, but it's so much better than everything else he's experienced. And he actually said that, you know, when it comes to those moments when I'm in crisis, when I am at risk of harm to myself or to other people, I want staff to use the walk around and not those other restraints or holds. And over the years, he's into his late 30s now. In different settings that he has moved into, he has always asked staff, do you know the walk around? Have you had Studio 3 training? In the environments or the settings where staff haven't had the Studio 3 training, they've had something else, there has been an increase, an observable increase in the level of restraints that he's experienced. And also there's an increase in the times when he's become quite distressed and had those crisis moments. However, when he has known and he has understood that his staff have got the Studio 3 training and the walk around, it's been able to be evidence that there's actually less times of a crisis for this person, but also his times of having the walk around used has also decreased as well too. And it really does seem to be, and this is coming from him himself, is he feels more confident when he knows that his staff can use the walk around as compared to any other sorts of physical interventions or restraint type procedure. So for him, it's made a really big difference. We learn from lived experience. So that would be from listening, working with carers, with families, with the individuals themselves, with people that have got the lived experience of being neurodiverse or having experience of being accessing services and experiences of those, of parents and of children, of adults who have experienced different training programs or different ways to those physical interventions or crisis interventions moments, and hearing back from them what they work, what works for them and what doesn't work. So we have that lived experience. We have people that have got lived experience, our colleagues who will be able to inform us and be able to give us that feedback, but also the people that we're supporting or working with are able to give that, or their family members are able to give that, or where that isn't able to happen is that we can understand that from looking at reports, assessments, and incident records of what's happened in the past and how we've gotten to a situation that's now a crisis where it needs that high level of clinical training input as well too. And we've got a very strong focus in eliminating restraint and seclusion. So where I think at the moment there is a lot of emphasis on reducing restrictive practices, of reducing restraints and finding other ways of doing things, we're coming from a point of saying, well, rather than starting here and how do we reduce things down to that, is let's start with no restraints and no restrictive practices. And if we need to have anything, well, we have to justify it. And by justifying it, we have to show that we have tried everything else, that we have looked at everything else, that we have been as creative as we can, and still more so to find ways to find alternatives to not having restraints and restrictive practices, but in particular seclusion as well too. And the idea of seclusion, of isolation, of timeouts, of having chill out rooms or rooms where people are excluded or brought to where they need to calm down as such, and eliminating a lot of those. We recognise that yes, people will need quiet areas and places to go to be able to regulate themselves. But when people are secluded, excluded, isolated, that has a huge impact on that person's neurodevelopment for a start when it comes to trauma, but also their stress responses and their experiences of stress has a big impact on their relationships and that sense of being supported by others and those positive relationship developing as well too. So we are strongly anti-restraint and will never, ever advocate for the use of restrictive practices in care environments, particularly around prone or supine restraint holds, okay? And we won't sanction seclusion of any kind. It's something that we recognise that we need to stop, and we are very vocal in preventing that and moving away from that as well too. So a good trainer, for a lot of our trainers, we have our trainers charter, and some elements of that as things around the operate within a human rights and ethical framework. So everything we do is from a human rights perspective and an ethical way of being able to work and implement a lot of the support strategies and developing those support strategies as well too. We're looking to eliminate, if not reduce significantly, restrictive practices and interventions. And we're not just about delivery. So we're not there just to deliver training and then walk away and tell you what you need to do. We practice what we preach. So we have practice leads and we have coaching. We have our trainers will actually embed themselves into a staff team or working alongside families to lead by example of role modeling as well too, to work alongside. And the other thing that we have with that is that we don't have trainers that have said, oh, I know what it's like. I was a carer 15 or 20 years ago and know exactly what you're experiencing. For a lot of staff teams, they've reported back that for them, it actually devalues their experiences. So for Studio 3 trainers, a key part of the work that we're doing by working alongside staff teams, embedding and doing that coaching and practitioner work, working alongside families, it means that we can say, we know what it's like because we do that care work as well too. By working along staff teams, we've got a lot clearer understanding and a really good understanding of what your staff teams and what carers are actually experiencing. with that. We don't know it exactly, obviously, for word, what that experience is, but we've got that empathy and we've got that understanding. We can appreciate and we can relate to it as well, too, from more of a practical view. A good trainer has got the right sort of ethos and the right sort of principles around restraint reduction and reduction of restrictive practices, that human rights based approach as well too, and around a person's sense of well-being and looking after that safety, that emotional, physical and psychological safety as well too. We're using that lived experience and collaborating with those that have that lived experience. And a good trainer should have that commitment, that passion, and that dedication to actually find out the best ways of supporting people, even if it takes more time, even if it takes more resources, even if it becomes more in depth and it's more difficult to develop and implement, that over time things will improve. And it's that commitment to do so as well, too, to have that person not just front and center, but their rights as an individual, as a human being, front and center as well, too. So we understand that behavior management training isn't just a tick box that you've done your course, there's just a certificate and off you go. It's making sure that as trainers, we have got that contact and we've got that sort of input and that working alongside. So it's not just about the delivery of content on a training day. We want people to understand where we're coming from, why. We're teaching the ethos, we're teaching the principles, we're teaching that sort of dedication as well too. However, that dedication to the human rights approach, that set of principles and ethos for other areas for that trainer, that dedication is not something that we can always train for. So we can get the material into people, we can help them to get that material, we can give them the information around the principles and ethos, but actually living and breathing and implementing that, and it's in their practice, is something that will come with the trainer. So when we're looking at and identifying trainers, whether that's as a senior trainer or an associate trainer with one of our affiliates, what we're looking for is people that have the right attitude. We can teach them to deliver the material, but they have to have that understanding. They have to have that sort of knowledge. They have to have that sort of principle and there's ethos that goes with that as well too, because they're not just there to deliver training to their staff members or to new staff or existing staff as a refresher, but they're also going to be involved in supporting their staff teams around the low arousal approaches, around making sure that if they've got physical interventions that they're doing them the right way, but also being able to help them to sort of improve the well-being and the supports and the structures around that person that needs those additional supports as well too. So it's not just on the content that we deliver, it's the coaching practitioner. It's working alongside your staff teams and around carers. It's working alongside families as well too. So it's not just what happens in the services, but also when that person is in contact with families or when they have time spending time with their families at family homes or with their parents, it's supporting them as well too. So what we get is a very much a consistent, integrated and across the board and across settings approach as well too. So being a Studio 3 trainer, we have to have care experience, but we have to also maintain that as well too. Training carers to support vulnerable people requires that idea of perception and understanding things from a different perception and looking at things from a different angle, being able to have that care and that empathy and that compassion approach, to be able to engage and build relationships and use those relationships, but those relationships are positive, unconditional, built on kindness and understanding, and also curiosity as to what's going on as well too, to actually understand and support people. And there's also that level of professional judgment and working within your services. So why are we a bit different from other organizations? Well, we don't have that us and them type dynamic, it's a we dynamic. So there's no distinction between service users and staff, and that you've got to be, as a staff member, supporting that individual and you're doing care to them, it's doing care with them as well too. We shifted that terminology away from challenging behaviours of concern, violence, assault, etc., to looking at more of that as showing as signs of stress or distress. We're looking at the physiological and the humanist approaches and perspectives when we're delivering training, but when we're supporting individuals that we're working with and their carers and their staff teams and their families as well too. But we're encouraging our trainers to also have that humanist and physiological perspective and approach when they're training their own teams and supporting their own teams as well too, and delivering that training. It's very much around that rights-based. We're looking beyond the behaviour to see the person behind. What is it they need? What are they missing? What is happening for them? And how can we as supporters help that? and that integrated approach as well too around the low arousal approaches. We are really, really honoured and very proud of the organisations that we have as affiliate organisations. They are the organisations that have invested in Studio 3 and have not just taken on Studio 3's low arousal approaches. It's not just our principles and our ethos and our humanist approach as well too. What they have done is invested further to have their own in-house trainers, their associate trainers, Studio 3. And they're the ones that will deliver training to their own staff teams, to their new staff members, as well as doing the refreshers for existing staff members as well too. But it's through them that we're able to show the evidence that low arousal approaches and the Studio 3 training in practice works. And we can get that feedback from a lot of organisations. One in particular of an organisation where the people that were supporting tended to be 2-to-1. And the difficulty with that was that obviously getting the staffing for one, but also in big sort of, I guess, big settings where you've got a lot of service users all sharing the same sort of space or living together. They really sort of sat back and actually identified the fact that one of the biggest triggers for a lot of the sort of crisis or for high arousal states was the fact that there was too many people in that environment. The other thing they identified as well too is that because there was too many people, that seemed to be contributing to the trigger of that environment. The other thing they recognized is actually when you've got 2-to-1, the people they were supporting would often quite struggle with who to focus on, who to talk to, who was engaging with them. And also they recognized that actually as a pair working together, there might be times when staff are interacting with each other and the other person is not being included, or seems to choose to not be included as well too. They also recognise that actually for the people they were supporting, what would be really good is if they had their own environments, if they had their own settings, if they had their own sort of homes. And what they did is over a period of time, as they started to sort of move away from having a group home to having actually individual units. And as a result of individual units, they found again, stress levels were coming down. And in natural fact, they didn't need that 2-to-1. And what they did is they worked really hard on being able to move the support from a 2-to-1, 2 members of staff to the one person being supported, to a 1-to-1 approach. And by doing that, they had noticed again that there was a lot less stress. There was a lot less moments of crisis. There was less incidents, less need to intervene. But because they only had one member of staff, it meant then they couldn't use the walk around. They couldn't use any sort of restraints or hands-ons, that physical interventions like that. And as a result of that, they had to get better at being able to do the low arousal approaches, the proactive and the reactive strategies to avoid those moments of crisis. And over time, they had developed and supported that person who now only had one member of staff, which was great because they had that 1-to-1 relationship, that 1-to-1 engagement, and that changed their sense of well-being. And that had a longer term impact. So over a period of about 3 years or so, this service had gone from being 2-to-1 with people living in a group home to 1-to-1 people living in their own units that might be side by side. But as a result of that, they found that the outcomes for the people who are being supported in that service had greatly improved. So much so that they were actually able, with the staff that they had, were able to expand that. And then as a result, they had the ability to take in more support, more service users, and be able to sort of give them the same sort of opportunities. And what they developed as a staff team is that they might start off as 2-to-1, but one of the key things they would have in their supports was to develop and get to the point where they could go from 2-to-1 to 1-to-1. And then once they got there, they're able to monitor that and then step back, and then they're able to get the next person in and again do the same sort of thing. As a result, their service was able to expand because of that. So it made a huge difference of that, of being able to have those low arousal approaches and putting those sorts of things into practice. As a senior trainer for Studio 3, that would be something that would be very difficult for me to see over a period of time. But because it was our associate trainers in those affiliate organisations, they were able to do that and then feed back to us to let us know that the approaches are working and the changes over that period of time as well. So they've been very valuable and make the difference in the lives of the people that they support because they've got that 1-to-1 and they know the people, they know the people they're supporting a lot better, and they're able to tailor and help and support staff to support that individual or those individuals a lot better and make those longer term changes. We've also seen it in schools, and over the next, I think it's the next couple of months, we've got a school in particular from the south of England, around the London area, that will be doing their own webinar to actually talk about their own journey of moving into the Studio 3 approach. So what we've got is schools that have looked at, well, what's going on in their organisation, but also in other organisations and other settings, what's happening in their settings, sorry, for some schools, and actually thinking, do you know what, do we want to do things different? Where do we want to be? Where do we want to get to? What do we want for the people or the children that we're supporting? And as a result, their principles and ethos and their mission aims have changed a little bit. And they looked at their current training provider and said, this is not meeting what we want to go to. It's not trauma-informed care practices. It's not trauma-informed care understanding. It's not supporting individuals from a human rights based. How can we do that? And exploring out, have come to Studio 3, asked for that training, looked at our training, implemented it, and said, yeah, this is what we're looking for, and have expanded and built upon that in their own settings. That's happened in some of the organisations, some of the care provision settings as well too. But in particular, we're seeing this a lot in schools as well too, where they want to do things differently because the system and the strategies they've got are just not working. They want to do something different, and they're recognising that actually the current way of supporting children in some of these settings, whether it's mainstream or whether it's special educational needs, additional needs schools, it's not working. They need to change. They want to do something different and better support the children that they've got. So that gives us a bit of a rundown on some of the things that I've been talking about and where we're coming from as an organisation. Giving a few little examples on that, but what I'm really looking forward to is any questions that you might have that we'll be able to sort of address a bit more specifically as well too.